Church doesn't end on Sunday, and neither does the conversation. Welcome to Sundays on Monday, the podcast from First UMC Port St. John, where we take Sunday's message and carry it into your week. Together, we're going to dive deeper into faith, upcoming church events, and how we can live out God's Word every day. Your faith-filled Monday starts right here because Sunday's message is just the beginning. Welcome to the very first episode of Sundays on Monday, the podcast from First UMC Port St. John. I'm Mick Waltman.
And I'm Joby Waltman.
We're excited to begin this journey with you.
And I say journey because I'm really not sure I'm totally excited about this. It's the first time I've ever done a podcast, and I really never saw that coming. So for those of you who don't know us, yes, we're married.
And she's usually in charge.
That's because I'm usually right. We've been a part of this church family for almost 28 years. And one of the things we love most about Sundays at our church is the way we all come together, not just to worship, but to grow in faith, support one another, and be the hands and feet of Jesus. And we come together as family on Sundays, which I love.
But here's the thing. Sundays come and go. And by Monday, we're back to our normal routine. That is one of the reasons we're starting this podcast, to keep the conversation going beyond Sunday morning. We want to give you a space to reflect, stay connected, and carry out Sunday's message into your week. So what can you expect from Sundays on Monday? Each episode, we'll take a few moments to dive deeper into Sunday's sermon. We'll unpack key takeaways, we'll answer some questions, we'll look at how we can explore to live this out in real, practical ways in our life. We'll also share upcoming events, stories from our church family, and we might even hear from a special guest along the way. Our hope is that this podcast becomes a part of your faith-filled routine, a little encouragement to start your Monday with purpose and faith. So let's dive in. Joby, last week was Easter.
That's good to know.
What do you think about that? What did we get out of Pastor Chris's message from Easter?
You know, I think the thing is that Easter Sunday may have come and gone, but the message of resurrection is something that we can carry with us every day. He didn't just rise for one day of celebrating and eating an Easter bunny or having a family meal, but he rose to give us new life, hope, and victory that lasts forever.
That's correct. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 6, it says, "He is not here, he has risen, just as he said." I personally look at Easter morning and that verse, and I see the women come to the tomb, and it's empty, and I see it's one of the greatest news that we could ever receive in history. It's so exciting that Christ knew he was going to be crucified. He went forth and died for our sins. And then the women came to the tomb, and it was empty, and he had conquered death. I mean, that is awesome, and he did that for us. You know, it wasn't just a moment in time, but it was a fulfillment of God's promise to redeem us. Because Jesus lives, we're no longer bound by sin, fear, or hopelessness.
And I think it's incredible that he did that, whether it was just for Mike Waltman or just for Joby or anyone. He would have died for just us, but he did it for all of humanity, for all of us that were to come as well.
Yeah, I come around to Easter every year. You know, we have Christmas where we talk about the birth of Christ, and then Easter, you know, you and I joke about how long Easter Sunday is, starting early in the morning with Easter sunrise service, and then, you know, all the other things going on, and then another service. But I walk away from Easter just looking at our church family and those in the community. As you said, he didn't just die for you or me, but for everybody. And how we can take that Easter Sunday, that Easter news, that great news of the resurrection, and continue to move forward in our life. I think we owe it to God to continue to live that out, not just on Easter, but after Easter. And I think it's something that we can remember and how we can do that. And, you know, one of the ways I think about practically doing that in our lives is you're always reminding me of how to be kind to people, you know, live with joy, be kind to folks. That is a practical thing we can take away from the Easter message. and live that out, not just the week of Easter, but throughout the whole year.
Because I think the real truth is that no one can take away that hope that we have in Jesus. And the only way that you're going to be able to live with joy is remembering that. The only way that you can treat the people that irritate the junk out of you is if you can remember that.
And there
Jesus
are some
Christ,
people who irritate
no kidding.
me. So.
is just remembering that he did this for us and calls us to go and share that love and joy with every single person.
And that was one of the things I heard from Pastor Chris in his Easter message, right, was that we are all in this together. You know, God died for all of us. He rose again for all of us. And we are in this, as he likes to say a lot of times, his catchphrase, right? We're better together. And I think we need to take that and live that out, live that throughout the year. That we're better together, not just as a church, but as a community. And in the small things we can do right here in Port St. John, they will make big waves out into the world and our society and help things. So we have to start somewhere, and God has called us to do that and to live with joy and walk in grace and share that message with those around us.
Yeah, and I think that, again, walking in grace and showing that love to everyone is an amazing thing to do. But sharing that good news, which isn't always the easiest conversation to start, but sharing that good news is such a critical part of what God's called us to do. And it's really amazing time to do this, is to share that Christ died for each of us and then rose and wiped out our sins for every single person. So sharing that good news is an amazing gift that we can give. Yeah,
it begs the question of who in our life needs to hear about Jesus today? Who in our life needs to hear the good news? Pastor Chris reminded us on Easter service that is also part of our calling, right? Is to go out and share the good news with others and bring them forward from that aspect.
Romans 8:11 said, "The spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you." That spirit gives us the ability and the strength and the power to be able to go forth and share the good news. So that same resurrection power is in you today. Don't go back to living the normal way after Easter. We have to live boldly in the truth that Christ rose for each and every one of us. So here we are a week after Easter. Now what?
Right. Now what? Right. It's 1 week after Easter. We talk about sharing the message of Christ with everybody. Pastor Chris shared with us actually today that, we are going to be starting a new series called The Parables of Jesus. And I find that very exciting to start and interesting also, because the week after Easter, talking about sharing the good news and what we can do and what God has done to share with us the message and things like that. And a parable, is a small story. And Chris talked about it this morning, that Jesus would take everyday things like farming, fishing, family life, and he would use them to share with us the grace of God, share stories about the grace of God. And one of the other things I took away from today's sermon was how Jesus stepped in to meet people where they were at the time, right? If we look at how the parables apply to today, we can bring the parable story to today, but we can't bring today into the parable story.
Well, I think the other thing I want to say is that those stories are amazing and wonderful, but in order to truly get the meaning of those, we really do have to pause, and we need to look and listen and really ponder what it's saying, because those stories don't necessarily have meaning for you right away if you're really not in tune with what Christ is calling us to hear.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, Chris started his sermon with asking us all a simple question, right? Like, do we remember certain phrases that our parents said? Or do we have a certain phrase that we use with our kids? I think you shared with us in the group.
I said, for Pete Rose's sake.
And
my kids always said, why you got to bring Pete Rose into it, Mom?
Yeah, but it was a phrase that you used to get the kids' attention, to teach them something, right? Like, what were they doing? It's like, for Pete Rose's sake, why would you do that, right? And the kids hear that today, and they still remember that, right? And Chris brought that to our attention, that it helps us to tell stories. It's those simple things of how to tell and raise our kids and how to share things with our kids. And that's what God is doing, right? Jesus is sharing those parables for people to hear and to share the grace of God with us and how we can put ourselves in that story.
But you really have to ponder what they're saying. If I went to my best friend's house growing up and her family had specific phrases that they said, if I didn't know them well enough, I wouldn't know what they mean. So you really do have to pause and listen and really think about the meaning and how it would apply. So it's there, but it's not really there unless you're truly paying attention for the meaning of it.
And I think that's with anything that we hear in the Word of Christ, throughout the Bible. And as Chris has taught us this whole year in the different series of sermons that we have done, you have to pay attention. You have to see yourself. I think that's one of the things I get out of. I love PC's. For those of you who don't know, we call Pastor Chris PC. It's just a funny thing.
You do.
A bunch of us do. But PC's message is always, I find it interesting for myself because I always try to figure out not just what his takeaway is, what his, as we say in the space industry, what the bluff is, the bottom line up front, what's the bluff of his sermon, but it's more of where do I see myself in the sermon? What do I get out of it? And I don't mean that in a get out of it way as a reward, but what is God trying to tell me to do? What is God trying to tell you to do? So as you're listening to the sermons and you're looking at these different things, I think one of the things to take away from the sermon today is where do we see ourselves in these stories? This is where I think real transformation happens, is if we put ourselves in the story and figure out what God is trying to tell us to do from that aspect. My favorite saying, you've heard me say it a lot of times in the 30-some years we've been married, but I sometimes need God to use a 2x4 to slap me upside the head, and
I've offered.
I know you have, but I appreciate you not doing it. But I think some of these sermons and some of these stories, I think that's one of the reasons I'm excited about this series. So where do we see ourselves in the stories? I think that's where real transformation happens. And I think we should continue to work on that and hear it. And sometimes, God needs to slap us. And I'm very excited about this parables because I want to see some of the special stories and special things that we're going to hear and what God has in store for not just us as a couple, but what God has in store for our church and what God has in store for our community. And as we get ready to wrap this up, speaking of that,
I had something to say today too. It's Announcement Sunday today. And as I said during the service, for those of you that heard, it certainly is a sad moment, even though we all knew that Chris was leaving already. But I think it also is an opportunity to look at Emily and pray for her and her husband and their daughter and why Christ is bringing them to us, making sure that we're showing them the love of Christ ahead of time and being prepared and getting ready for this new journey in our church lives as well. So I do highly encourage you to take some time and pray for that family as they get ready to join us. And there are certainly a lot of other changes that are coming up. You guys heard about them this earlier, but we're going to go ahead and just remind you that we're definitely making some changes to our prayer list. And if you want to know things in more detail, they'd love to have you join the prayer team because that's a great place to be able to hear the details. But otherwise, we're going to keep it general and just pray for the will of God in these situations. Remember that we're taking a pause for our food pantry for the summer and trying to rework some things. So again, make sure that word gets out. And then finally, I just want to say that at the end of June, we're going to be celebrating our Vacation Bible School. If you're interested in serving or have children that you'd like to register, please call the front office and give them that information because definitely it's an all hands on deck.
Yeah, and don't forget the We Care ministry that's starting up. We've got the We Care survey that we'd love for you to take. I think it's just 2 questions.
It's pretty simple.
Pretty
just
simple.
Yep.
And I know you're on that care team, and I know we're excited to get our We Care going. And I'll say I personally am excited to see not only you, but others on there, as this was a definite dream of a good friend of ours who passed, Mr. Roger Franklin, how we can take care of each other in the church. So take the survey and let's see how things kick off. And I would say this as we end this podcast today, let's not let the joy of Easter fade away. This week, Joby and I would love to challenge you with this. Like, what's one way that you could live out the resurrection? How can you get involved in the next story, right? Maybe it's showing forgiveness. Maybe it's stepping out in faith. Or maybe it's just simply starting each morning thanking Jesus for the victory that he's won and that he has given you his grace to continue moving on. So if this message encouraged you, share it with a friend. Let's keep the good news going. Thank you for joining us on this very first episode. We are excited about this journey. Whether you're driving to work, enjoying your morning coffee, or winding down from a long day, we're glad you're here. And if you're part of First UMC family, or even if you're just tuning in from afar, we're blessed that you joined us today. This is Sundays on Monday, brought to you by First UMC Port St. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and stay connected with us throughout the week. Have thoughts, questions, or prayer requests? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep the faith, live with purpose, and remember, Sunday's message is just the beginning. See you next episode.